How did you avoid not having an Australian accent and an American accent at the same time?
Yeah, man, just
Some people who've gone on
not
vacation and came back with an American accent. So
yeah. You know what it is? It's just not getting along with people. That's how you not have an accent. Is if you don't get along with anyone, you won't talk the way they talk. And yeah, I just happen to not want to yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just always just wanted to talk the way I just wanted to say whatever I wanted, and so I never tried to um I never tried to assimilate very hard, I guess. It's probably the word. I mean, I think a lot of uh kind of younger, how am I gonna put this? Like when people come to Australia for college, they usually yeah, they usually pick up Australian accent very quickly,
that's
but I
what I
just
was
never
saying.
get
They
yeah.
just turn. They just become, all right, get out, Mike. And you're like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I just never. I don't know. I just couldn't. I can't do till today. I still can't do any accent other than my own accent.
You
Maybe
know
I'm
what?
just bad at accents.
Maybe you are, Ronnie.
Yeah.
Maybe you are good
Even
at your own
I
accent.
can try to do a South African accent, but
There, you got it.
you know where I got the South African accent from? It's from watching Lethal Weapon 1, because the
Oh,
bad
really?
guys in yeah. Because the bad guys in Lethal Weapon 1 or 2, for some reason, they were like South African. Do you remember that? I think that was the first time and this is me being ignorant. Yeah, that's the first time I think South Africans were in pop culture for me, was the bad guys in Lethal Weapon.
Remember, actually, one of our first Hollywood exporters, South African, was a guy called Arno Vosloo. He was also a baddie in The Mummy. So
Oh,
he
wait,
was the
what
bold
was
guy
he
in The Mummy. But then people only caught on when Charlize Theron got to Hollywood. But Arnold Vosloo was our first import or
what was
export.
he in what was he in The Mummy?
He was a bad guy. He was an
Wait,
evil.
he was the mummy?
Yeah, he was an evil guy, and I think he was also in Scorpion or something like that. But just Google Arnold Vosloo, you'll see him. If you see him, you
Oh,
recognize him.
oh, yeah, yeah, I know that guy. He's bald, right? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah. What's
but the
up
South
with
African,
that? Why is South African accents in the West like evil? Why is
because
that
it does
like the evil?
because it's from. You remember that whatever accent that you saw as South African first on television and movies is Afrikaans.
Yeah.
So South Africans and Afrikaans have a very checkered past. If you know apartheid in our story very well.
Oh, oh, sorry. I didn't know enough about that. Yeah,
No,
but
but
that makes sense now, I guess.
it makes
That
sense.
makes
So
sense, actually.
whenever you hear "I'm going to kill you," you're like, "Hey, calm down. Those days are over." So you can never have the English accent as a South African if you're white. It's very rare unless you're English
Right.
yourself.
Oh,
So
you're
Anu
evil.
exported.
Right. That's really funny, man. That's super funny.
But you
Well, how
see,
would you do? Uh, Sorry, what were you saying? That he exported the evil accent?
he
Is that
exported the Afrikaans accent as a bad guy. So
But
whenever
Lethal Weapon was before that, though.
before apartheid,
Lethal Weapon was before the Mummy.
oh yes, but I'm saying that whenever people started hearing about Anu Vosloo and his accent and his acting, it was he came off as an Afrikaans guy because he's an Afrikaans guy trying to speak English, but he
Okay,
speaks very well.
can
Mhm.
you do Afrikaans and then do the can you do the evil one and then the not evil one?
I try to tell you that I'm going to kill you.
That's evil, right?
Yeah, that's evil. That's
Yeah,
like
that sounds evil. That already sounds evil. Yeah, yeah.
that's like a special branch police Afrikaans person in 1980s trying to convince you that he's not Afrikaans.
So, in the Marvel universe, there's
Yes,
Claw,
yes.
and he's doing Afrikaans, right?
You see, exactly.
Damn.
You see,
Damn,
how
damn.
you
So
figured it out.
wow. I always thought that was like, again, this is how ignorant I am. I thought that was like a South African accent, but um you know, like just a specific city or region. I didn't know that was like evil. I just thought, as in, I wasn't naive enough to think that all South Africans sound the same, but I just thought it was a regional thing. I didn't know it was a ideological evil. I didn't know it was a good and evil thing. Jesus.
No, so we associated with, obviously, but now times have changed a little bit. So, you know, whenever you hear someone's Afrikaans accent, you don't automatically assume that they're special branch police. But but that scar is still there, you know. So it's like when you see a German Shepherd, and you're just like, someone sent you here, but then the dog is like, I'm just a pet. They're like, no, you've in your history of existence, you've never just been just a pet. Who do you work for? So it's whenever you hear that accent of, I am going to come there now and destroy you. So now you're like,
It doesn't help that they say stuff like that too.
It doesn't help. So and also it leans, if you look at Hollywood movies, the sophisticated bad guy is always going to be British. Right? So whenever you have a bad guy accent that is sophisticated, it's going to be a British person. And then whenever you have a highly deceptive former Czech Republic or Dutch ex-special forces, it's always going to be German, Russian, East European. And the closest you can come to our side is Afrikaans, because Afrikaans comes from Dutch.
Oh, right. Okay. Interesting.
So if you think about bad guy stereotypes in Hollywood, it's always either been the British sophisticated, devious thought of plan, or it's the rogue, you guys made me like this because of the war in my country, Dutch, German, East European, Russian accent.
Sure.
And then when there's an African bad guy, it's always, I don't know where they get that accent, but they just always have that accent of a bad guy / dictator and / warlord. And I'm like, I think someone in Hollywood is just telling people lies.
So in African pop culture, in South African pop culture, is there a bad guy accent, or is it just whatever?
I think, you see, because we have 11 official languages, including sign language. So if you have to take every...
That doesn't count, by the way. Okay.
It doesn't, but
it's 10. There's not 11.
That's to them.
You can't claim sign language as an official language. You can't do that. Okay, so we got 10. All right.
Mandela said it, right?
Sign language is universal. You can't claim sign language as one of the official languages of South Africa.
South Africa is... Nelson Mandela said it, and we never argued with him. Wait. So with sign language, is it just one? It's one. So you can't have English sign language and Afrikaans sign language.
No, you do. There's English. There's American sign language, and then there's like Australian sign language, but I mean, you're claiming it as an official language. Now you're just trying to talk yourselves up. Okay, so we get it. You got a lot of languages. You don't have to put in sign language as like 11. Like, come on, man. Well, you're gonna put emojis as your 12th language? Come on, man. You're not. It's 10. Okay, let's. It's like you're trying to. I know you can't fool Americans. Okay, you can't fool me with that. We got 11 languages. One of them is sign. Anyway, yeah. So what's the evil language? How much of the 10 is the?
We're never gonna argue with Nelson Mandela. So it happened. He called it. So if you think of all the languages, every culture has its own accent.
Yeah. Okay.
So it would be very hard. So we always gravitated towards. There's the black accent. There's a universal black racist like accent that everyone adopts if they want to sound black. And then you also like, but no, I don't know anyone who sounds like that. But then it's almost like the black South African version of a Karen. So whenever someone speaks like a white lady, like, who speaks like that? This one person that you spoke to who annoyed you sounded like that. Now it's universally the same. Right. So with us, it's kind of, but Afrikaans we can all agree on.
It's evil.
That,
but are they good? So who are like good Afrikaans? Like who is like a I don't know, you know, someone who had a lot. He gave a lot to charity.
No, we haven't had one of those. I think actually Afrikaans people have had two heroes, but then after dissecting their intentions, we were like, actually, you're not a hero, you're just an asshole. So one.
Wow. What about Matt Damon in Invictus? What was that?
Afrikaans.
That was Afrikaans, but he was a good guy, right?
Well, if you consider the fact that if you play rugby and you win the World Cup, you automatically raise the sins of the
He was a good guy in the movie, is what I mean. In Invictus, he was a good guy, right?
Yes, he was a good guy in the movie. He was a good guy. But there's a guy called Paul Kruger. So Paul Kruger, have you heard of the Kruger?
He already sounds evil. Paul Kruger already sounds evil. Don't you think? That's already an evil name.
So Paul Kruger was this rich, powerful politician who sectioned much of South Africa between two provinces, right? He sectioned that and made a national park, his own park. It was first his park. So if you've heard of the Kruger National Park, where you find the Big Five in South Africa, that was his own personal park. And then when he was about to die, he brought on the biggest scavenger hunt in SA history, and he printed Kruger rands, which were gold pieces of coin that he buried all over the park. So he was evil, and he tried to do some good. And people have been finding the coins, actually.
What? Okay, wait, what year was this?
Geez, it was in the 18... What year was Paul Kruger? Let me Google him.
Just roughly, what was it?
Yeah, I think it was early... It was a late
1904.
Yeah, but he died in 1904. But I mean, he didn't just bury the treasure just before he died.
Sounds like he was an environmentalist and
that was an asshole.
Like,
and the other, yeah.
But how did he talk? How did he sound? Is there a record?
There's no records of him, but from his picture, you can tell he sounds like a bad guy. In the
Afrikaans. Is there any overlap between Dutch and Afrikaans in terms of words?
A little bit. So, but Dutch people look down on Afrikaans because they feel like it's baby talk.
Sure.
But if you know the history of South Africa, you'll realize that Dutch is a mixture of, Afrikaans is a mixture of a bit of French and a bit of Dutch.
Okay.
So the Dutch came here first, and then the British, and then the French. But then the British were against the Dutch and the French, so the French had to be friends. That's why you find the winelands. So that's why South African winelands are the best, is because the French colonists that came down, they came with the vines. So they came with the best vines. Then they found the Dutch already there in the winelands. But then the British had already told themselves that they're going to be by the port. So if you go to Cape Town, you'll find the V&A waterfront. That's why it's named after Queen Victoria. So they wanted the port, and then the Dutch people and the French people moved inland. So the French said, look, we've got the vines from France. This is a great climate. It almost looks like the same climate in France. So that's how their friendship started. So a lot of Afrikaans surname, like Prinsloo, is a bit French and smart. And so all those surnames have French heritage, but the French and the English got together. The French and the Dutch got together against the English. So
I wonder.
That accent comes in.
Right. I wonder where was the first Dutch person who started sounding evil. You know, like his accent was Dutch, and then somewhere along the line he just went, "Yeah, we're all going to destroy all of you," and then it just switched into Africa, like the first evil guy.
You know where I think the first Dutch sounding or Afrikaans person sounding person became evil is when Black people worked for them, but they never allowed them to leave. I think from there, that's the one part where I'm like, so I can't leave, so I'm a slave now. Yeah. So now, whenever you hear that accent, you're gonna be like, oh, that's evil slavery bullshit. But then if you think of, so when the Dutch, oh, now it sounds like a bit of a history lesson about South Africa. So,
okay, man. Well, people should learn more about it. I don't know who's listening to this though. Is it more South Africans who are like, we know all this already? So
no, if they know about this, then I'll be surprised. So,
okay.
when the Dutch moved more inland and became friends with the French, the winelands and the inland places started growing a little bit more. But remember that when they were sailing in and out, they had to make friends with the Khoi, which are the indigenous people of the Cape. So it's almost like the Native Americans in the US.
Yeah.
So they started trading with them. So they traded for meat or for milk or for grain, and then they would leave. And then they would trade again and they would leave. But then they realized that this was a great place to be. So they started trading iron or steel with the indigenous people, which fueled a lot of infighting that was happening within the tribal chiefs of the land. So whoever was trading more with the Dutch and the French, giving them cattle, giving them milk and grain, got steel to make spears. So those spears were used against the other smaller tribes. So that's how the Dutch segmented the Khoi people in Cape Town. But they started settling, so that's why they call them settlers. So they started settling. So when you gave them cattle as an indigenous chief, they didn't slaughter the cattle, they kept the cattle. And they left one guy, and then one guy became two guys, and then they started farming, and they started needing less from the Khoi people. Right? And there was a lady called Krotoa, who is very famous. They've even made a movie about her, but the movie was a bit derogatory because it doesn't stick to the facts. She was taken in by Jan van Riebeeck as a young girl to learn Dutch and become a translator between the two cultures. And she did that very well for a very long time. But then the Dutch and the French went on to decimate most of the Khoi people. So that's why there's modern day, Cape Town now. So it's the Dutch and the Khoi side, and then obviously it's the British side that was in the bay or in the docks, and then also with them they brought a lot of Malaysian seamen.
I was about to say that I read somewhere that a lot of Malay people moved to South Africa.
Yes, so they came with a lot of the staff that was working on the ships was from Malaysia. So they would go off, and then so the people that lived closest to the coast used to have like restaurants and bars and pubs and obviously illicit trading and prostitution. Yeah. So that's how a lot of Malaysian people came to settle. So that's why you find like there's a group of Cape Malay people in South Africa, and there's a big link to Malaysia in South Africa. So that's the brief history of South Africa if you think about it. But after that, then they moved inland to more what is now Johannesburg and Limpopo and whatever. It was a migration. They call it the Great Trek, which was the Great Migration when they moved from the coast up to inland. Right. Yeah. So that's
cool, what. Is there a lot of Malay food in South Africa?
I think in Cape Town.
Yeah.
There's a region called the Boerkaap. It's a little suburb where a lot of people there are Cape Malay. So you find that they make that kind of food, but it's also a mixture of. Would you say, Josh, Indian and a bit of Malay? It's not strictly Malaysian.
No, but Malaysian is. Sorry, yeah, Josh.
I've never had Malaysian food before, to be honest with you.
Oh. Well, Malaysian food is a mixture of Malay, Indian, and Chinese anyway.
Oh, then
so there you go. You know, yeah. But then do they speak Bahasa there or in the Malay place or not really? They're not Malay at all, just in race. Culturally, the South African. Yeah, that's cool, man.
It's a special racial group that wouldn't exist outside of South Africa. I think if they went to Malaysia and went like, no,
totally. There's all these interesting little pockets of people like the Greeks in Melbourne. They form their own, so Melbourne, Australia has the largest population of Greek people outside of Greece. Brazil has the largest population of Japanese people outside of Japan.
Really?
For some, that's where Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of comes from, because they brought judo to Japan, to Brazil. And Chinese people just everywhere for some reason. Jamaica, Russia, you name it. They just there's always Chinese people everywhere. There was one more diaspora, I can't remember now, but it's always interesting that, yeah. Oh yeah, I think oh my God, what's that African country that has the largest population of Indian people?
South Africa. It's in Durban.
Is it South Africa? I thought it was.
Right. It's Durban.
And what's Durban. That? Oh my God, I feel like I'm having a stroke right now. What's the African country that starts with K?
Kenya.
Yeah, Kenya. I thought Kenya has the largest population of Indian people. No.
No, we take the trophy. We have the most in Durban.
Yeah, so, I've gotten to meet a lot of South African comedians over the last, I would say, over the last 7 years, especially. I started to meet more and more, and I've never met a South African comedian who's a piece of shit or who wasn't funny or that's why I agreed to do this, to be honest. I actually hate podcasts, but when they said like, oh, it's this South African comic from, I'm like, yeah, I'm in. I've never met I've never met I never had a bad experience with a South African comedian, and I've met quite a few. You know, the Goliath brothers were always really cool to me. Dusty actually moved down to Brisbane a couple years ago. Dusty Rich, obviously Mr. Noah, and there's Louisa Goila. Sorry.
Yeah, you said it right the first time. You nailed it.
Yeah. No, he's a good friend. He's actually a good friend. I knew him from before I even moved to America. I think we met in Edinburgh or in Melbourne. You know, he was always a cool guy. They've always, all of them. I've never met one. In fact, I asked them where all the like bastard people, and they were like, oh. They said like there's none except maybe some older generation.
Yeah.
like before Gen Y people who are like, I don't know, angry or whatever. But so I never met, and I don't know if I can say the same for. I'm trying to think if there's any piece of shit Australian comedians. There's definitely piece of shit Australian comedians, but thankfully they don't kind of leave the area. I think there's no piece of shit Singaporean or Malaysian comedians. But
piece of shit.
But there definitely were piece of shit like non-Malaysian Singaporean comedians who moved to. So I don't know about South Africa, how comedy started in South Africa, but the way comedy started in Singapore and Malaysia was obviously the expats would bring it. So the expats would bring stand-up comedy to Singapore and Malaysia, and they would do the gigs for other expats, right? So, and you know expats, like they can behave really badly. And I think the inevitable evolution of it is always they kind of bring it, and because they have the social capital and the confidence, they seem like these comedy gods, right? Because they know how to organize the gig, people show up, they can make any crowd laugh. You know, all they have to do, like if they speak in the local dialect, everyone loses their minds because it's like you know, these expats who they know our swear words, you know, so they were like killing it, and you watch them, you're like, oh my God, these guys are great. And then inevitably it's always like, let's face it, if you're a British or Australian person and you move to Singapore and Malaysia long term, I mean, it's because you couldn't compete back home. There's something, you know, not quite right with you, and it takes a few years for that to show up, you know. And then after a few years, inevitably it becomes, oh, this guy he's a bit of a piece of piece of shit. And then the community inevitably like takes over itself again, you know, like expels, and then they try to make it their own. Oh, it divides into two, and then there's his disciples versus the, you know, I've seen it happen so many times in so many Asian countries. Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong. It always happens like that, you know. And hopefully we're past that now. You know, we've had comedy long enough to get past that. But I could see it happen every single time. It'd be the colonists come and colonize, and then that because they're pieces of shit, it always causes a fracture and then divides into two. And then it's the people who stay loyal to the piece of shit, and the people who are like, nah, this guy's a piece of shit. We can't, you know, listen to this guy anymore. And then and then in the end, it's like you're just trying to make people laugh, you know. But you form these weird cliques, and yeah, it's
what what you've described right now is almost like what the South African comedy industry is like. So if you think of before, it was only older white men that were exposed to Monty Python and all these British TV shows that used to exist. So they watched that, and then they used to get gigs from the casinos. So with the advent of democracy, black comics started coming in, and they were the side acts to the social capital having older white. So then the material that was discussed or shared in those kind of situations, obviously was a lot of racist stuff, and obviously because they were playing to the crowd. Then the black comics were coming in. There's the first generation of black comics, and I guess myself and Trevor and Loyiso and the others are the second generation of black comics. So we're the third generation of South African comedy.
Right.
So then we started realizing, and because that's when Facebook was starting, you know, we had Facebook to advertise, and then we could.
Yeah, you go straight to the fans. Yeah.
Yeah. So now we were talking to people who that comedy was not talking to. And that's when this club started sprouting out, and we started having our own comedy style and discussing and having vernac added into it. But you know, I always used to think, I think generationally, it's always going to be an ideological battle between the younger and the older generation.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, that's normal. You're right.
But when you're on the other side of it, as a younger generation, you always assume that the older person might be wrong. And I think they were just stuck in time. And the saving grace for our generation was globalization. So there was a time when I stopped doing comedy for like 3-4 years, because every time I went out and did comedy, it almost felt like the paradigm was shifting. It almost felt like whatever the newer person I was finding at the club, the kind of stuff they were saying was almost 10 years behind instead of 5 years ahead. So yeah, I started feeling like, I started feeling like the older person that feels like, that pushes the envelope instead of feeling like I must catch up to the envelope.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, you are right that there's something very natural about that cycle. And so because it's natural, there's nothing like wrong per se with that, right? That the younger generation will always try to have better ideas than the older generation, and there can be some very natural resentment in that. You know, I do think that some places take it further than others. So so for example, I think in Australia that definitely happened in a very bad way. I think what happened here in Australia is that so the TV and film industry in Australia, let's just talk about comedy. The comedic side has been in shambles for a long time, and I think they kind of look back a lot on their golden generation. You know, we won the treble in '99, like always pointing to that, you know, treble, that year we won the treble. A lot of like that, you know, 2 great sketch shows that kind of redefined comedy. And you know, comedy is kind of like a young person's game in some ways, right? Sketch comedy or TV comedy is kind of like, you know, stand-up comedy is kind of like an older person's game, because you kind of need the perspective and you need the maturity and you need the when you have that, people are willing to listen to your philosophies, right? If you're like an 18-year-old trying to talk about how tough life is, people are like, why don't you shut up and, you know, go and learn more about life. But so stand-up comedy kind of favors older people, but like sketch comedy, you kind of need to be young, otherwise you're making fun of stuff where you're actually the joke, which is I think what you're talking about. You know, you're kind of making fun of systems and making fun of millennials, but then in the end you're the joke because you're the one who is backwards. Yeah. So in Australia that kind of happened a little bit, and well, a lot. And so, you know, every day in Australia, without fail, they'll play they'll play bloody Blackadder every day on TV. Blackadder. They can't move past Blackadder, and it's what happened, I think, in Australia was that there was the global financial crisis in 2010. I don't know if it affected South Africa. I assume it did.
No, we were okay because we had the World Cup, you see.
The World Cup stuff. Okay, this is interesting. We should talk about this because the countries that were heavily affected by the global financial crisis, America, well, sorry, I'll explain America later, but let's say Australia. What happened is that it wiped out middle management, right? Because all the jobs were at stake. And so the people in the weakest position were the middle management who were quite expensive, but less senior.
Yes.
So they got wiped out. So you got left with baby boomer, Gen X, this older generation, and then all the cheaper Gen Y millennials. And there was no one in between to translate the ideas. So you get this culture in Australia that's extremely skewed old. It's very old. You know, all the sensibilities are very old. All the shows that come out are very, you know, for old people making fun of young people, or old people making fun of old people, you know, and yeah, so it's culturally this whole thing, and the difference becomes so apparent when you compare it to America, because in America everything skews very young in America, right? That's why everything's so cutting edge. And I mean, we can speculate. All of what I'm saying is speculation, by the way. I don't even know if any of this is correct. This is just what I suspect based on what I've seen. And in America, I think things skew very young, and because in America, if you don't get results, you get fired very quickly, especially in television. So you have to get results, and results in TV means numbers. You know, numbers, not just money, but views, blah blah blah, all that stuff. So everything's kind of skews very young. Whereas in Australia, like, because in Australia it's very socialist, and we take care of people here. Healthcare is really good, you know, free education. It's very hard to fire people here. so because of that, all these older generations in the entertainment industry were protected and entrenched. And they got so entrenched that they're so hard to get rid of, you know, like, speaking of someone, like, if you're my age, and I think you're, you know, I'm basically the same generation as Trevor, essentially, same age, you know, born in 85, 86. Like, when we presented our ideas to these idiots, it was like, you know, what they literally could not, they can't understand what you're trying to say, what jokes, why would you have this perspective, you know, it went over their heads. And because they were so strong, we couldn't get rid of them. And then it was like, go find your own way, right? Because you're not gonna get anything you're gonna get scraps, and then inevitably whatever opportunities they give you, they will handicap it because they want to be in charge, and so they'll make you look like shit. And then guess what? When you look like shit as a comedian in these countries that's not America, or even in America, but let's just say Australia, South Africa, you know, when you look like shit, you're gone. They bring the next person in, and then they make them look like shit, and then they bring it, and then they'll stay constant. But all these young comics were like, this is my only chance. I have to work with these people and give them my best ideas and give them my energy. And they'll take all your good ideas, your energy, and just fuck it. And then when they fuck it up, they'll just get the next person in, and they'll be like, okay, who's next? And then they'll keep doing that cycle after cycle, you know. And it's lucky if you can escape that, you know. Yeah, you can escape that. Yeah.
You know what you've just explained now? In a social experiment in South Africa, it's more racial and cultural than it is about anything else in entertainment. So, for example, the biggest paid channel in this country, right, which has a monopoly, is white owned. So what they've decided to do about 10 years ago was open 2 channels where they specifically wanted to create black content. So they said, you can create anything. Whether it's a soapy, a comedy sketch show, a talk show. Look, guys, we've given you your own. And then what happened was diversity. And then what happened was it became a brain drain from the national broadcaster that was in shambles already. And then people went private, obviously, to this company. But the kind of content that they started making, it was content that if you are a white South African who's out of touch with who black people are, it reinforces the stereotype of ignorance, violence, witchcraft, backwardness, and crime. But if you are a South African that's living in the reality of South Africa, you would go, the only thing that's realistic about this is the backdrop. But the content is not. So if you film in a township or in a small house, of course it's real because it exists. But what the people inside are saying and doing and how they're saying it is not real. But that started becoming...
There's diversity, but no authenticity.
Absolutely. But then what happened was soapies became more... So soapies are 99% of what you find in those channels. So you don't find anything else. There's no talk shows, there's no music, there's no comedy. So all of that, what you see is that. You see the witchcraft, you see the gangsterism, you see, even if they scale it up like they have now and make it sophisticated, right? And the bad guy drives a Lamborghini. It's still a black guy who's trying to screw other people. And you watch that and Trevor and I have had many conversations about this recently, about the kind of content that gets spilled out to the general populace. And what I've realized is it's the same thing that you have said. You can either crack your head in a system that is unwilling to change, or you can play to an audience that wants the change. What we take for granted, it's almost like when you look at America and when they talk about voter education, and I was saying to Roy, we were having this discussion, I was saying, if I was American, if I was a policymaker, if I was an author, if I was a content creator, I would create content for young people, 10 years old, 12 years old, to teach them about voter education. I would literally skip a generation to teach the next generation that will be eligible to vote, how to vote.
Yeah, it's a good idea. It's how the English Premier League does it too. Yeah.
You see, so if you think about the voting policy in South Africa is vote black first, because of obviously apartheid, right? So we're always going to be voting black first. But if you think of America, is vote your wallet first. So if you're going to vote for whoever is going to make your life easier or keep it the same if you have money. But if you don't have money and you're a minority, you're always trying to ask the person with the money how they can help you get some money. So if you think of the college electoral, the debates, all of those systems were designed to confuse people who were, one, uneducated, two, poor, and not white. So it was based on a social class. So if you teach children how to cut across the noise and what is voting, first of all, and who you should vote for and what ideas you should vote for more than the individual, then you're gone, right? But then
I can agree with that. Yeah, I think I can agree with some of that. Yeah, I think I think a lot of you're right. I think not just America, every country should have a little bit more focus on civic education.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's say America. I think America definitely needs it more than other countries. I think because I grew up in Singapore and we had civics class where you learn about the country and how to be a good citizen, you know, and you can argue that's propaganda, but I think in America, kind of like the beacon of free thinking democracy in the world, like you need to spend a bit of time to learn how that works, because otherwise it can go pretty wrong, you know. So if you're going to be the beacon of freedom and democracy, I don't think people understand, like they have certain civic obligations. And I think it's very easy, just like all humans. This isn't just American. This is like human beings. It's just lazy. We're just lazy. We don't want to put the work in. We want to have easy decisions, and then we want to blame other people. And so when you say, like, you know, in America, it's like, why is it these two people? Why is it these two shitty candidates? And it's like, well, you know, the time to address that was during the Democratic primary. If you really hate that, the time to do the work was a year ago. To campaign and figure that out. Well, where were you then? You know, you're just sitting on your ass complaining as usual, you know, instead of doing anything about it. So I do agree that there is, I think Americans can learn more about how the country works. Like even just the idea that, do you know that the president, we put so much emphasis on the president, like he's the executive.
Yeah.
The guys doing the thing is the legislative. That's the part where it's not sexy, but that's the part of the thing that you need to pay attention to too, because if the legislative is a certain direction, the executive can't execute shit. He's just there to like stand on the ship and like
sign
he's
off.
not. Yeah, he's signing off. So if you are really pissed off at that, like go figure out your executive. And then added, as you said, the added complication that in America, you know, all these states are like its own country. So you've got the state-based governments that tie into the federal. So you have to care about your state, you have to care about your local neighborhood, you got to vote there, you got to vote in your state, then you got to vote national. Like there's a lot of shit going on in America, you know, like, and most people don't care. And, you know, you can argue that that like in America, one of the freedoms is to not care. We have the freedom to not care about anything. So yeah, and that's legit, you know. But if you're gonna not care, then you can't complain, you know. So,
yeah. You know, we take for granted what popular culture and indoctrination has been doing since, I think, since the 70s and the 80s when it comes to movies. You've never seen a movie with a head of state not being as powerful as the legislature or the legislative. Yeah. Always the president taking the briefcase and then pressing the missile, or the president is
yeah. We should have stopped that 2 years ago, but no one wants to watch the movie of the guy sitting at his computer drafting legislation of because that's boring shit, and it is boring shit, and like I don't know, this idea that there's so much work that goes into things that, you know, even drafting legislation, like, do you know like how much you need to read and write just to draft this bill that someone summarizes in one sentence that it's like bad for everybody?
In a tweet and goes, this is shit.
Yeah, and it's like, dude, there's stuff in it that's probably shit, and there's probably stuff in it that tries to get something done. Like, we just brush it off as like one, like you try to paint it as like, this is gonna kill everybody. And it's like,
if you think about, Ronny, you're so true. If you think about indoctrination, actually, this is a topic on its own. Indoctrination by pop culture, movies especially. If you think of, for example, if you think of bedtime, you never think of bedtime whenever you watch a movie, and as you grow up in our generation, and think of a single-story house. You think of bedtime as upstairs. Okay, upstairs, go to your room. Then you go, where? In every movie that I've seen, bedtime, it has never been on the same floor.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true. That's really funny.
If you think of, okay, guys, what are we having? Takeout. Okay, let's get Chinese. Then you're like, okay, so is that takeout? If I'm eating at home, is that takeout? If people are having street food, it's a hot dog. If you're having a babysitter and the parents are away, you're having a pizza.
Yeah.
If you are having a Christmas, we do not take cues from how television was responsible for skewing our generation's way of thinking. People who are about to turn 40 and who are raising kids now who are 5, 7, 10 years old. We're raising them based on what we saw. We want a house with stairs going up. You know, we want an SUV to put them at the back. We order when it's Friday when we're out of ideas. You know, we take them to a theme park on holidays. We take them to camp on their school holidays. But where did we get that?
Yeah.
Malaysia does not have a culture of eating pizza in camps, and every house has to have a second floor. So if we think of all of that, so the movie said to us, the head of state, protect the head of state. In America, this is the guy that you need to protect. In America, this is the guy that you need to protect. So we've kind of gotten used to it, and it didn't help that the most loved presidents, except for Teddy Roosevelt, was assassinated. It didn't help.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. It didn't help that Kennedy was assassinated. It didn't help the fact that you need to protect the head of state.
It doesn't help.
It didn't help.
It doesn't help. You're right. It doesn't never helps. That never helps.
It reinforced the stereotype so many times that the American president with their little like flag became the most important person to protect in the country.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's also a broader idea of people not knowing that they have to put something in to get something out of it. You know, I think that's, and you can, I don't know if this is going on a tangent, but you can put it back to comedy.
We love tangents.
The way we, you know, I sound like an old person now, but like, just, you got to put something to get something out.
Yeah.
And applying to comedy, it's the way I always see it. now is like when you do a live comedy show. So basically, I think now there's people, because we've had internet comedy for quite a while now. So the people have kind of grown up with like Instagram comedy, like let's say just a meme. I'm not talking about the well-filmed sketches, you know, that's like something else, but there's just a meme, just a photo with a joke on it, right? And people laugh at that, and I laugh. Everyone laughs at it because it's funny. And sometimes you go from that to like watching a stand-up video, and you go like, damn, this meme, this one picture, no video, made me laugh harder and so much quicker than this stand-up. This guy talking, there's like a setup. Like, what the? I don't even care. I don't care about this guy. He's already pissing me off because he's talking, and I'm not gonna listen to the end. And even if you do listen to the end, you're like, what was this? This is terrible. This sucks. So my point to all that is like, I'm not even dissing internet comedy. I think it's great and there's a place for it. It's super funny. I just think that like when it comes to stand-up comedy, which I think we kind of do, it's like when you pay money and you show up to the event, you become emotionally invested in the outcome, and because you gave that, you get more out of it. You know, you get a bigger payoff. I think you get if you're willing to. Obviously, the guy has to be good and professional, but if you're willing to give them your time and attention and money and effort to show up, like you get more out of it. I think, as opposed to this attitude of like this, like you pick up your phone and you're like, you look for 5 seconds and you're like, this sucks, and then you go to the next thing, you're like, this fucking sucks, and your whole life is just looking at things that suck because, you know, you're just sitting on your ass, just like this requires no effort, you know, if you're doing that. And so, you know, the counter argument is that professional comedians, you know, the attitude is very Chinese. It's like, if I pay money, you better fucking make me laugh so hard. You better do this because I paid you money. This experience better be perfect. You know, that kind of attitude, as opposed to attitude of like, I'm gonna listen, you know, I'm gonna give you my attention and my time and then see if I can get more out of it. And by the way, I'm a professional comedian, so I agree that professional comedians, is your job to entertain and you should be able to make it. So I'm not saying, hey, you know, like, listen to us even if we're not funny, listen to us. That's not what I'm trying to say. All I'm saying is that as a consumer, you get more out of things that you put something into. And if you go into situations just like this, like, then obviously you're not going to get anything out of it, you know? So anyway, sorry, this is to tie back to the idea of presidents dying.
What you are explaining is exactly what I've been talking about and thinking about as well. And I was saying that if you think about the kind of the prime comedy audience, it's people our age, right? For us, it's people in their mid-30s, going in early 40s. It's because those people are slowly driving into the wall of an existential crisis. They're asking themselves questions about existing. Why did I get a degree? Was getting married a good idea? Why did I buy a car? Did I need 2 cars? Why did I buy a station wagon? Then they come to comedy. Then here's a comedian speaking to facts about upbringing, about raising. We become the heroes because we look like we are fucking carefree. We show up to work in a t-shirt and a cap. We speak bullshit for an hour. We charge $200 a ticket and 7,000 people come. So they look at
how much your ticket prices. Oh my god! I could move to South Africa. No, I agree with that.
So that crisis makes them attractive as an audience because they're looking to us for answers. Because their parents led them astray with education. Their wives or husbands are busy putting them in a spot where they have to entertain strangers on Sunday in a barbecue. Their boss is telling them that they have targets to meet, unless otherwise, you know, they lose their jobs. The government is not doing what they're supposed to do for them with a tax break, with a job, with the money that they're earning from a job they hate to support a lifestyle they don't love.
You're describing very unhappy people, yeah. I agree with you. Yeah.
Here we are.
I agree with you. Yeah, I think I'll give, and also just as an olive branch, so that I don't sound like I'm just an old person hating on young people, which I swear to God I'm not. I'm just describing the situation here. I think throughout history of comedy, people have always hated stand-up comedy. There's always been people who hate it. So this isn't like a new thing, which is also what gives me hope about the future, is that like So, even back in the day, even in the 80s, when there was not a lot of content, it was just like, 3 channels. There were people who never watched stand-up or who watched it and hated it. Just like now, it's people who watch it and hate it. So there's nothing, it evens out, because I think, as you said, we're seeing internet celebrities age for the first time, because they've been in the game long enough to age. And so we've seen the audience age. And I think, when your sense of humor changes, like when you're younger, Sesame Street is amazing. And then when you become 20, you're looking for, as you said, something a bit more sophisticated that speaks to your experience. And then that's kind of where stand-up comes in. So it all evens out. I'm just saying, describing it's fine. And also, I think, like, when you find one good stand-up comedian that you like, you naturally just want more. That's how I got hooked. I saw one who I really liked. Sorry?
You want them to Peter Pan. You don't want them to grow up. If you find
no, what I mean is that if you find one stand-up comedian that you like, one stand-up comedian can only make so much content, no matter how prolific you are. So you naturally start looking for other stand-up comedians. Then that's how you kind of get into it. You're like, oh yeah, I know how to appreciate this now. I guess I'm just arguing for, like, that like, it takes a bit of skill to appreciate stand-up comedy as well. As much as it is our job as comics to make people laugh on demand, which I'm not shying away from. That is our responsibility. We're professionals. We should be able to make people laugh. Yeah, there's also an element of, like, the educating consumers is what I'm trying to say. That, to get a bigger fan base, you have to they have to be kind of educated as well. It's just like UFC. Like, when UFC first came out, like, no one knew what the hell was going on. It's like, why are these guys hugging? But then the more educated the audience for UFC got, which almost sounds like an oxymoron, like, then they start appreciating, like, oh, they're actually fighting in that, when they're lying on top of each other, there's actually a fight going on there. Like, oh man, that's amazing. So, then because they became educated, the art form kind of flourished more. And, anyway, you get what I'm saying. I'm preaching to a choir here.
100. That's why I was saying that I feel like with me, and I see it with audiences as well. Once they find a comic that they like, they sort of want them to stay Peter Pan. They don't want the comic to grow up. They don't want the comic to start having ideas that are different from what they started loving them for.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think they know enough to actually think that, but I think subconsciously, yes, they do think that. Yeah, subconsciously, when the artists change, all the fans are like, why did you do that? And I think that's every art form, though. That's why Kanye West's albums, some of them are like, yo, why didn't you just do Late Registration? And Kanye is like, well, okay, Kanye's a bad example because he's a little nuts right now, but, like, he's, it'll be like Eminem, like, I don't want to do the same thing I did. I'm on to the next thing, Just like, as a comedian, I think professional comedians, our thing is, what's the next joke, right? And so we move on to the next thing. We don't want to do the same stuff, So yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
How do you feel like now you've just given me an existential crisis here. How are you going to fight that when your time comes, when you are 10 years from now and you're like, damn, Ronny?
I don't know. I don't think you can, depending on what kind of comedian you are, if you're the kind of comedian who's not pandering and who isn't, you can only be who you are, right? If that's the kind of comic you are. If you're the kind of comic who kind of speaks, your style is speaking your truth, you can only be who you are. You can't really overthink it. And then you hope that in 10 years, people still want to hear what you have to say. I think just like everyone, we can become irrelevant if we stay out of the game. But I think the saving grace is that stand-up comedy is traditionally an old person's game.
Yeah.
Because I think the older people kind of had more perspective, and people are willing to listen to them because they sounded like they knew what they're talking about. So traditionally for male comics anyway, I mean, female comedians, they face, tremendous challenges, which I don't even want to go into because I don't know their experience fully. But as male comedians, I think we kind of traditionally age a bit. We peak a bit later, right? Like 40s, when you're a bit jaded and you don't care anymore. And so you can really start talking shit about everybody. Is when people kind of get behind it a little bit more. So there's that, there's the fact that traditionally it's an old man's game. And then you kind of, I guess you look at like, George Carlin or Lewis Black or whoever, these guys who are you know, Roy Wood Jr. always says that the great comics always died like with bookings on the calendar. They, you know, they kept doing shows until the moment they died. And I think we will inevitably contract our fan base, but there will be people who kind of stick with us, you know, if we keep it, if we're prolific enough and we build a fan base strong enough, like we'll be doing 50-seaters until we die, I think, I hope. So meaning we might not be the whatever, you know, arena, whatever act, but we'll still have our fans, I think, you know. But also I think this is the wrong game for job security, if you know what I mean.
I think you're reading my mind here. I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking to myself, I was like, in most, do all comics, and this is just a rhetorical question perhaps to myself as well, were all stand-up comics that are working and are funny? We guaranteed we know that you're funny. Is this the one thing that they've always wanted to do? Or did they become so good at comedy and shitty at everything else that when they have wealth and money and popularity from comedy, they start pursuing what they love? Like, what's the escape hatch here? Because, you know, when you watch Western movies, that one bank robbery in that small town, or that train is, we're going to split the bag and you're going to go that way and we're going to go that way. And then, you know, all the movies.
I don't know.
Yeah, but with us, but you know what I find weird is when a super wealthy comic that I know that you're rich comes and wants to do this thing all over again and wants to tell me that money doesn't matter. And I'm like, calm the fuck down. You wore the t-shirt and you wrote the cap on purpose.
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual. Because like there's some guys who stand up was never their game. They just hit something, you know. They just hit something. People got behind it. Like, I mean, maybe this is sacrilege to say, but Steve Martin is a good example of someone who, like, he hit a huge audience. He was really good at it. He did love it. But ultimately he didn't love it enough, or he sensed that his style, something, right? And then he moved on to movies. I mean, his book is actually a great book to read. I think it's called Born Standing Up or something. Yeah. And so that's a good example of someone who, like, couldn't be bigger. He was number one on the planet, and then he just gave it up at the peak and never regretted it, by the way. So you can argue that's someone who it wasn't really in his blood per se. And then there's guys like Trevor who I think he'll do it until he dies, and he's got enough money that he can do small shows for no money. He would still do it, you know, just love of the game. Just keep doing it for love of the game. So it really depends. And then also, hey, we're human too. Like, your perspective changes. If you make a bunch of money and then suddenly you go, fuck man, the road, it's tough. I got kids now. Like, you're human. Like, your perspective changes. You maybe you feel like you just don't. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, to make money and not want to do it. Not want to do it. I mean, what? I mean, I don't think that's, you know. It's so what's the word? Like, I don't know. It's so weird to judge someone like, man, he didn't love it. He made money and then he stopped. Like,
Look,
let him stop.
Look, we can only answer for ourselves. In all the stuff that you've done stand-up, then stand-up led you to doing television and movies. Did you ever find yourself in a movie set feeling like this is better than stand-up?
Yeah, of course. But this especially with American unions, man, they treat you really well. You have your own trailer. You're doing stand-up in bar shows where it's like, ugh. You know, you're like put on to die in front of people. Like, people come on, like, attacking you sometimes. So definitely on set where I'm like, yeah, this is way better. But I always loved stand up, so I always went back to do it. And I had my journey of like loving stand up, and then doing the Daily Show, and then doing movies, and then realizing after doing those things and enjoying it and loving it and thinking this experience-wise, this is way better than stand-up. They take care of you way better. And then still realizing that, oh, but damn, you know what? I still love stand-up. I'm never going to stop doing it. But it took me doing that stuff to realize that, oh yeah, I'll never stop doing this. So that, and I'm pretty young, 35. So I had to figure it out myself. I didn't know like that, but doing that stuff made me realize that I love doing stand-up, and doing stand-up despite having done that stuff, maybe a month before I'm coming off a movie set, and then you go to stand-up, you're like, oh yeah, fuck man, stand-up is super fun. I love it. And it's easier, like you said, you're alluding to it just now, like obviously it's easier to say when you're making money from it, that money doesn't matter. So I remember when you want making any money, and then you go, damn, is it worth not making money? So I get it, but definitely doing it, being able to make money from it, and then realizing that, oh, I would still do this, without, even if I wasn't making money, which is kind of what I'm very lucky to be able to do now, which is I kind of do stand-up shows sometimes, and it's like, whatever. This sounds like I'm being arrogant, but it's like, I'll tell the room to keep the money, because I'd rather see the room keep going than trying to get $25 from these kids in Brooklyn who are just trying to run a comedy show. I'm like, you guys keep it. I just want the stage, stuff like that, where I'm able to do that, especially during this pandemic. If this pandemic didn't make me realize I love stand-up more than anything, like literally doing shows in New York City, like we're all risking death here just to do these comedy shows. Lately the last couple of years have really reinforced that I just like doing it, and I'm lucky that I kind of find an audience, and I'm lucky that in America you can kind of find ways to make money other than live touring that help you, be able to be able to have some artistic integrity with your stand-up, where you're like, okay, I don't need to involve other people. I can say what I want. I don't have to do the shitty corporate if I don't have to, because luckily I'm making enough money from this thing or whatever, So yeah. I like, in a weird way, making money can help you become better at stand-up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the extremes are positive for a stand-up comedian. When you don't have money, you're hungrier, and when you have a lot of money,
it depends on the individual. It depends. It's like a player. I've been reading the Roy Keane autobiography. Is very interesting. It depends on the player, right? Like soccer players. Some people, the money, once they get the money, they're like, they lose the drive, right? And some people like Roy Keane were just insane, where they're like, it doesn't matter how much money. It's like, I just want to, like, I won the treble, and immediately after winning the treble, it's like, how are we going to win the next one? Like, that kind of, and so it depends on your personality, right? If you're the kind of comic where you're like, you release a comedy special and the only thing on your head was like, how the fuck am I going to do this again? Like that's because you just want the next joke. So it just depends on the individual.
We had so much